Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today we're going to be talking about that moment, that day when you make a mistake at work and how what happens next can have a massive negative impact on your confidence if you get it wrong. So you've messed up, you've made a mistake. Now what? Well, I was collecting some data from October 23 until now, and I've had over 1,600 professionals who have now answered a question about having a mistake or a failure at work. And the question that I asked shed some light on how much of an issue potentially this is to your confidence. So I asked, would it impact your confidence if you made a mistake or had a failure? And out of 1,600 professionals who answered that question, 86% of them said, yes, it would impact my confidence if I made a mistake. So I wanted to talk about it on the podcast. So we've touched on it in various different guises before, but I wanted to just talk about making a mistake and the kind of impact that that can have on your confidence, depending on how it's handled. So I'm going to refer to a story which is a personal story. And when I was a fairly young lawyer still, I guess I was about 3 years qualified, maybe 4 years qualified max. I hadn't been in my career for, too long. I made a mistake at work. And I want to share a little bit with you about what happened, what the impact was of what happened, and how I handled that mistake and how my employer handled that mistake. And I'm going to reference this in relation to what impact it had on my confidence, because this is a podcast where we're talking about all things confidence at work. And as 86% of the people have said, if they had a mistake or a failure at work, it would impact their confidence. And I can tell you that it definitely impacted mine. Now, fast forward to today, and I handle mistakes completely differently. And now, if I make a mistake, it does not have such an impact on me that I would say that overall it dents my confidence. And how did I do that? What's changed? Well, I'm going to tell you about the mistake that I made and how I handled it. And I'm going to tell you about what's changed. And I'm also going to help you to understand how you might be handling mistakes that you make and how that might be having an impact on your confidence. So, back to my story. And if you've been to a training or you've been to a class with me, you may have heard me tell this story before. And so, back when I was a young lawyer, about 3 or 4 years qualified, I was working in the London office of my law firm. And I used to deal with medical negligence cases. And that means that in this instance, I was working for a family and the husband, the dad in the family had died due to some substandard medical care. Now, the mistake that I made was I messed up when I was making the documents that had to go to court, the formal documents that had to go to court. I made a mistake in those documents. And that's one of those errors, those mistakes where not only have you made like a professional mistake, so you've got something wrong, you also are working for a client and you wanted to get things right for them and you didn't. So basically, I kind of felt like I had doubly messed up. So one, for this client who was, trusting me with their claim, and two, it was a professional error which was serious enough that it probably would have to be notified to our insurers. So it wasn't great. And I only realized what had happened because the other side in the claim made an application to strike out this part of the claim. And that was when it came to light. So it was pretty serious. And it was one of those moments where we had paper files back in those days. I had to hold the paper file in my hands and kind of steel myself to walk into my boss's. We had open plan offices, but I had to steel myself to walk into my boss's part of the office, like, where she was sat with this file in my hands, probably ashen white, and say, "I've messed up. I made a mistake." And I can still remember her swiveling around in her chair and looking at me with this file in my hands, and I was probably pale. I think I was pretty shocked and, a bit scared. And I could tell from the look on her face that she knew what I was gonna say to her once I opened my mouth, was that I'd made a mistake, and that we'd probably have to contact the insurers. And now it was drilled into me in the law firm ever since I'd started working in law, ever since I become a solicitor, and even when I was training, it was drilled into me the importance of, if you ever make a mistake or something's gone wrong, the most important thing is that you have to go and tell somebody, right? You have to tell your supervisor, you have to tell your boss, because if you don't, then they might not be able to claim on their professional insurance. Now, insurance is there for a reason, because people make mistakes, people get stuff wrong. So, of course, you have insurance there to protect your client. But they drilled this into us early and often. If you make a mistake, don't worry, just come and tell us. We'll either find a way to rectify it, or we have insurance. And the reason that you have to tell us straight away is because otherwise we might not be able to claim on our insurance. So I'd had this drilled into me so many times that I knew I had to pick up the file, walk into my boss's little office, and tell her that I'd made a mistake. So I did. And I can still see her face. And it was one of those awful moments where your heart sinks, or your heart kind of jumps into your mouth. You feel sick in the pit of your stomach. You go pale, you go cold. You just realize, I've totally messed up. And I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that in your career. I guess by the time people have had a long career, most people could give an example like that. Most people have had a moment where they messed up, something went wrong, there was a mistake, and that's going to be different for all of us. But probably the thing that we all have in common is that we're probably not going to get away for the whole of our career without doing something like that, right? Without messing up, without making a mistake. It's going to happen. And what happens next when that mistake comes to light, or when that fuck up happens, is really important for what happens next to your confidence. So, in my example, my boss and my firm dealt with it really well. My boss didn't start ranting and raving. She didn't start yelling at me. She didn't start telling me that I was rubbish and that I needed to get out of her office. She calmly said, "Okay, walk me through it. What's happened?" She got a handle on it. She said, "Yep, I agree. I think we probably do need to tell the insurers, but here's what we can do now." And together we kind of plotted out what were the next steps for me to take away and do them. And then she was going to take away her steps and do those. Now, she didn't once put a lot of blame on me. There was no blaming, there was no shaming, there was no name calling, there was no criticizing. She just calmly and quietly helped me to understand what had happened and what we had to do to fix this mistake, if in fact it was fixable at all, which really wasn't clear at that point. And so when I reflect now on the way that she dealt with it really well. She was supportive, she was encouraging, she was helpful, she was proactive, she was great. She handled it in like a model way. But the way I handled it was completely different. The way I handled it was like the opposite of the way she handled it. So I did loads of naming and shaming and blaming of myself. I did loads of doubting myself. I did loads of beating myself up. I completely forgot all of the good things that I'd been doing in the last however many years. And I just zeroed in on this one mistake and constantly replayed that in my mind. And I reminded myself of it every single day when I came into the office. And that happened for months. Months. I reckon it was about 3. I used to say, oh, it was like 3 weeks. And actually, I thought, that's just a lie. It wasn't 3 weeks. It was more like 3 months. And you can imagine what that would do to somebody's confidence. Imagine every day they're getting beaten up because they made a mistake. Imagine every day they're having somebody doubt their ability, their experience, their expertise, whether they should even be in the job, whether they should even be working on these files and helping these clients, whether they should even have been able to qualify for the job that they spend 6 years qualifying for. All of those doubts were running through my head all the time. There was loads of comparison. So I was thinking, I'm the only one that's ever made a mistake. None of these lawyers have ever done it. Like, I'm the crap one. I'm the odd one out. Everyone else seems to be able to handle things. It's just me that's made this terrible mistake, right? I was negatively comparing myself. I was criticizing myself. I was doubting myself. I had this ideal like standard in my head that this just shouldn't ever have happened. I shouldn't have made a mistake. Not in my job, not in my position. And, you might say, well, it's not a very realistic standard. People do make mistakes, and I can see that now. But at the time, I was like, well, that shouldn't happen. The standard should be no mistakes made. And while all this was happening, I was completely glossing over the fact that I was doing loads of good work for loads of clients and had been for years on the cases that I was working on. So I totally forgot about that, and I just zeroed in on this one mistake and on this one problem and beat myself up, doubted myself, compared myself. It was awful, as you can imagine. And working in that environment pretty much destroyed my confidence. Because how could it not, right? If you were constantly being compared, doubted, criticized, told that you couldn't meet the required standard, reminded of your mistake every single day, it would leave your confidence on the floor, right? And it did leave my confidence on the floor. And I recorded a podcast for somebody else recently where they asked me particularly about this. And they were like, how did you get out of it? And I think over that 3 months, I didn't get out of it. I continued to like replay it in my head the whole time, and it had a really bad impact on my confidence. And it was one day, and I also kind of kept it inside how I was feeling, because I think I kind of felt ashamed of the fact that I'd made this mistake because of all this blaming and stuff that was going on inside my head. The more I didn't really want to tell anyone about any of that because I was kind of ashamed and probably felt like I deserved it. But also, I just didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to let people know. So things probably looked okay on the outside. They just felt terrible on the inside. And it wasn't till one night I was having a chat with my cousin-in-law's brother, and he's a pretty positive guy. He's really nice to chat to. And we were just chit-chatting, and he said, how have you been? What's been happening? And I just, for some reason, because I didn't see him very often, I just think I just decided to tell him the truth. And I was like, to be honest, John, I've had a really terrible 3 months because, here's what happened. I made this mistake. And I remember his reaction, and I'll never forget his reaction. He kind of sussed what I was doing in terms of what I was making it mean about myself, like I was a crap lawyer and I shouldn't even be in the job, and what I'd been doing to myself, which was beating myself up mercilessly and reminding myself of this thing every day, and how that was having an impact on me. And he could really clearly see all that. I think he might even be a coach now. Anyway, but he could really clearly see all that. And he kind of mirrored it back to me and said, look, this is what's happening. And like, what's going to happen if you keep this up? This is really bad. What you're doing right now to yourself is really bad. And he really kind of put it in perspective. He was like, everybody makes mistakes at work. You made a mistake at work. It's time to draw a line under it. And for some reason, that one conversation was like the catalyst to start turning it around for me. And in the end, I did. But I tell you that story because I think if you're like me, if you were like me then and you tend to, set yourself pretty tough standards and give yourself a hard time, you can easily end up in a mess if you make a mistake because you will end up trapped in this cycle where you beat yourself up, you doubt yourself, you'd set perfect standards which you haven't met. Then you are comparing yourself and just focusing in on this one thing that went wrong instead of seeing everything that went right. And that is like a perfect storm for eroding your confidence. And basically, I talk about this because I just don't want anyone doing to themselves what I did to myself after I made that mistake. And now I can see from that data that I spoke about earlier that when I asked, would it impact your confidence if you made a mistake at work? And 86% of you said yes. I'm thinking, hang on, the reason why is because they would handle themselves in the same way I handled myself. So no wonder it would have an impact on your confidence. Now, it may be that you're working in an environment where you really are going to get hung out to dry if you make a mistake. Maybe you really, your job is on the line or your reputation's on the line, etc. Possibly that is the case. And of course, that's a difficult environment to work in. Of course, you're going to be terrified of making a mistake in that kind of environment. But I wasn't in that kind of environment. The environment I was in was, they're not whooping for joy that you've made a mistake, but they accept it's part of the job. They help you to learn from it. They help you to fix it and they help you to move on. Now, I hope that you're in an environment where mistakes are handled appropriately and sensitively, and somebody helps you to learn from it, and they don't beat you up or constantly remind you of it, and you are allowed to learn from it and move on. I hope you're in that kind of environment. But even if if you're in the kind of environment that I was in on the inside, so if you're the one doing the naming, blaming, shaming, comparing, doubting, and focusing constantly on this thing that went wrong, that's a really difficult environment for your confidence. And the reality is that most of us, probably everyone in fact, is going to make a mistake in the course of their career. That's just reality. So I want you to be armed with this knowledge for either you may have already done it or you may be going to do it in the future. Because hopefully you've got a long, happy, successful career in front of you, and probably that career is going to have some kind of issue, setback, mistake within it. So I want you to think about how you're going to handle that when it happens so that it doesn't destroy your confidence like it destroyed mine. And the easiest way to think about this is to think about how would you want someone to handle it if you made a mistake? How would you want your boss or your organization or your team to handle it if you made a mistake? Would you say, I would want somebody to help me learn from it? I would want them to maintain their trust in me. I would want them to keep encouraging me. I would want them to be supportive. I would want them to help me to fix it, draw a line under it, and then move on. Right? Most people are going to say something to that effect. So now think about how you handle it when you make a mistake. Do you learn from it, not lose trust in you, keep encouraging you, keep being supportive, and allow yourself to draw a line under it and move on? Or do you do what I did and systematically go about destroying your confidence? I have to tell you that the way I handled it was the worst way that I can think of to handle a mistake. And it was terrible for my confidence. And if you're handling mistakes like that, it's probably going to be terrible for your confidence too. So I want you to think about it. And I want you to just make a decision today while you're listening to this podcast. How do we handle mistakes? right? Imagine you're your own organization. What would you decide the culture should be in terms of how we handle mistakes? And make sure that you're handling your mistakes like that. There's no good saying, yes, I want to be in an organization where we are allowed to draw a line under it and move on, and we don't name or blame or shame, but we help somebody to learn from it, and then we still trust them and we still support them and we still encourage them and we all move on. If you're doing the exact opposite, I hope that you're in an organization that helps you to draw a line under it and move on, and that supports you and doesn't name or blame or shame you for a mistake that you make. But I also hope that you aren't doing that to yourself, because I know it creates havoc for your confidence, because it did to mine, and how could it not? So I want you to think about it today. How will you handle any mistake you make in the future? Because you know what? You actually get to choose. No one had ever told me this, so I never knew that when a mistake came along, I got to choose how I was going to handle it. You get to make a conscious decision. I didn't make a I didn't think, "Oh, let me treat myself like absolute crap after I've made this mistake. That'll help." I didn't decide that. My brain was just running around doing its own thing. But it running around doing its own thing was really bad for me, and it was really bad for my confidence. So you get to choose. How do you wish mistakes were handled within your organization? That tells you how you need to handle mistakes if and when you make them. And if you found this podcast because you actually have made a mistake and you're thinking about this right now, I want you to even take the time to sit down and write this down. How do you want your organization or your boss to deal with a mistake when you make it? That is how you need to handle a mistake when you make it, because that is what is going to help to maintain your confidence. That is what is going to help you be at your best at work. Not how I did it. For God's sake, you can do it so much better than I did, so that you can at least have a fighting chance of maintaining your confidence and your trust in yourself when you do make a mistake. All right, it's never going to be ideal, it's never going to feel great. All of us wish that we could go through our career and it was never going to happen, but that's just not life. So, as someone who's been there and done it and made all of the mistakes in the book, I'm going to suggest that you try and do something different than me. Please, God, try and do something different than how I did it. Decide ahead of time. This is how I deal with mistakes when they happen. And then commit to handling them like that when they do. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you. If you want to come and work with me, I have two offers for you. The first is private coaching. And I typically work with people for 12 sessions over 3 months. And in that time, we do a deep dive into all of the challenges and the problems that you're facing at work. And we work to eliminate those so that you can feel and do what it is you want to do at work. There is a link in the show notes, and you can click on that and book a time to chat to me about coaching. I'm happy to hear what you're facing, hear how you want things to be, and then tell you whether or not I think I can help you. The second offer I have for you is not available yet, but it is almost. And the second offer is called the Members Club. And the Members Club is new for the Yes You Coaching community. And it's grown out of, so during COVID, during lockdown, we started a group called the 8 a.m. Club. And on Monday mornings, women would come together and we would have 30 minutes of coaching, community, bits of training. And basically, it just gave people a little bit of community, a bit of coaching, and a bit of a boost on a Monday morning. And I loved that space. It was great. And when we shelved that sort of at the end of COVID lockdowns, I always hoped that one day it would come back in another guise. And now it has, in the form of the Members Club. And the Members Club is going to be a women only space. And we're going to have live coaching calls, we're going to have trainings, and then we're going to have particular focuses that we're working on. So one quarter we might be working on self-doubt, another one a particular type of confidence, another one we might be working on speaking up and presenting. And you can bring all your challenges, your problems that you're having to the live calls and get coaching and support. And the idea of the members club is it's going to be a little oasis in your work week where you're going to be supported, strengthened, and sustained, whatever kind of work it is that you're doing. So that is coming soon. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.